I wanted to talk a little bit about courage, the difference between courage and bravery. They sound similar, and they certainly are related. To me, courage is the strength or fortitude to do something, and bravery is the act of doing it. And there's some fear mixed up in there, too. There are even some who conclude that bravery is courage without thinking about it, doing something brave without the time to build up the courage. But I feel like there's nuance there. There's still time for that courage to build. They're so closely related. I think courage grows even in the seemingly spontaneously brave among us. In my research, I found it interesting that there were 6 types of courage that people used: physical, social, moral, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. And I'll go back through these. So with the physical courage, we've got the courage to keep going, to make the next step, to take that physical risk, that it hurts maybe, but I'm gonna keep going. The social courage is being yourself, even when it looks like everyone else might not be okay with that. Moral courage is doing it anyway, even when it feels like everyone's against you. Emotional courage is really feeling all of your emotions, letting them just feel in your body and having that courage to do that even when it's difficult, not pushing away from those emotions takes emotional courage. Intellectual courage is the courage to learn and unlearn and relearn even when we think we know. And spiritual courage is this heart-centered approach to life, even when our hearts feel hardened. I wonder what you all think of those, and if some of them sound more achievable than others, or if some of them are more easy to understand. Would it be easier for you, would you rather perhaps walk across some hot coals? That's a physical courage thing. Or would you rather raise your hand and say, that was really hurtful and actually kind of racist, and I think we need to talk about it? Some people might rather walk across hot coals. Do you think it'd be easier to make a phone call to someone you don't know in the congregation to see how they're doing? Or would it be easier to speak to someone during coffee hour that you've never met? Those might be equally challenging or equally easy. There are lots of degrees of choices and degrees of courage and degrees of risk. They're individual for each of us, while also feeling fairly universal and resonant. Some things just take courage. Some of you might have noticed at the end of my email signature a quote from Adrienne Marie Brown that says, "I am not afraid of what I came here to do. I am made of stardust. We are not afraid of what we are called here to do. We are all made of God." Made of stardust and God. I am certain that Adrienne's version of God is deep and wide enough to reach beyond religion and vocabulary hang-ups to reveal a divinity in all of us, a divine struggle to be courageous, to speak or reach or move from the heart, to try and not be afraid, to not only have skin in the game, but to have heart in the game. To put your heart at risk of being broken open is a worthy cause. But Brené Brown writes that you can choose courage or you can choose comfort, but you cannot choose both. And so as much as Adrian's strong words inspire me, I know I will not always be able to utter them so confidently. Some days I will utter, I am afraid of what I came here to do, and I'm made of stardust. We are afraid of what we came here to do, we are called to do, and we are made of God. There's discomfort and fear that lingers in the presence of courage. In the face of a brave choice, there's a risk and not always a reward. This week, over 100 schools in Virginia had hundreds, thousands of students walk out in protest of Governor Youngkin's anti-trans policy rollbacks. And 28 schools in Fairfax County participated. As the impact became clear on social media and on the news, on Thursday, conservative groups started to get online and trying to figure out who was behind this, which adults had ordered these kids to go out into the streets. Was it the teachers that had done it? Was it their parents? Was it some liberal guru over the top saying that this was a good idea? No. The kids did it by themselves. They organized, and they organized really brilliantly. They organized who to do what by when, and that'll get things done one thing at a time. To me, they nailed it, and they embodied all 6 kinds of courage. The physical courage to actually walk out, the social courage to be yourself, the moral courage to know that not everyone is for you, the emotional courage to feel all the feelings and be with each other and hold each other's hands as you're feeling them, the intellectual courage to know that you don't know everything and that adults don't know everything, and the spiritual courage to maneuver from the heart place and to say, we will not stand down until students are protected. They're peaceful warriors embodied with signs that say, keep your politics off my identity. These kids are brave, and they will be our courageous adults very soon, voting adults. And there's a 30-day comment policy open right now, comment period open right now on that policy. It started last Monday. And it might take some courage to say something. There are already thousands of comments up there. But let me ask you, what difference does it make if you don't say anything? What difference does it make in our kids' lives here at UUCF if they say to you, this happened to me, and you say, you have to know that you did nothing to support them? This is not a trick or a trap or a guilt question. It's why I wrote colorful postcards over the last few weeks for Reclaim Our Vote. It's why I'm going to the school board meeting this week. People are my ministry, not policies. In 1993, Dr. Maria Root wrote a Bill of Rights for people like her, mixed-race people. She said, children of mixed-race marriages had never had anything like this. We've all had feelings all along, but not to put it into any kind of structure. It gives people something to talk about and feel recognized. I'd like to read it to you as a mixed-race person myself. I have the right not to justify my existence in this world, not to keep the races separate within me, not to be responsible for people's discomfort with my physical ambiguity. not to justify my ethnic legitimacy. I have the right to identify myself differently than strangers expect me to identify myself differently from how my parents identify me, to identify myself differently from my brothers and sisters, to identify myself differently in different situations. I have the right to create a vocabulary to communicate about being multiracial, to change my identity over time and more than once, to have loyalties and identification with more than one group of people, to freely choose whom I befriend and whom I love. All of that takes courage to state for oneself, and then to write it for a group of people with mixed race heritage to say for themselves, to be able to claim one's own space and be unapologetic about it. It takes social courage, emotional courage, spiritual courage, and physical courage in certain spaces. Now, Dr. Root wrote that in 1993, and that led to the changing of the categories on the census for people to identify with their race. In year 2000, those things started to change, and she was at the center of those changes. But that's been almost 30 years. And I think that's enough time to develop another Bill of Rights for our trans and non-binary kin. I would never endeavor to write something about them without them. And I read Dr. Root's words as a mixed race person because I can identify that way, but I cannot read words as a person who identifies or lives a life of a non-binary or trans person. But I was inspired to adapt her words, to say something brave to our trans and non-binary kin. Imagine it as a prayer, if you will, a blessing we can send together right now. A Bill of Rights for trans and non-binary people. You have the right not to justify your existence in this world, not to keep your gender within yourself, not to be responsible for people's discomfort with physical ambiguity, not to justify your sexual or physical legitimacy. You have the right to identify yourself differently than strangers expect you to identify yourself differently from how your parents identify you, to identify yourself differently from your brothers and sisters, to identify yourself differently in different situations. You have the right to create a vocabulary to communicate about being trans and non-binary, to change your identity over your lifetime and more than once, to have loyalties and identification with more than one group of people, to freely choose whom you befriend and love. To what are you called to have courage? Is it your identity? Is it your spirit? Is it in your physical, social, moral, emotional realm? Maybe you're called to encourage others, to help them find courage on their journeys and the strength within to be brave. Are you called to journey and provide support along the way? Are you called to listen? Are you called to be silent? We have many, many choices, friends. Let love guide us toward the courage to be brave.